Pyotr, how are you?
Hello, Mario. Yeah, well, tired, not many hours of sleep, but things are moving fast, aren't they, right now? I'm sure people who are joining this have seen the streams. We're hooked up to my channel as well, so maybe some of my audience will be joining, but pretty crazy out there right now. And we've got Hezbollah, we've got Lebanon as a new front, Cyprus. I would say that we're pretty clearly in a regional wide conflict at this point. Different hot zones, but I mean, you're looking at it from Dubai. How is it out there for you?
I'm pretty high up, so I don't hear anything. I heard a few explosions very lightly on the first day. I think it's calmed down in Dubai. In Saudi, an oil refinery got hit, didn't it? I think the biggest one there.
Yeah,
Have you
it
seen that
did.
news?
Yeah, I think, like, from my perspective, what I've been reading in different news outlets and on X and stuff is that Iran seems to have a different strategy from last year in the 12-day war. They've learnt their lessons, much like Khamenei made some contingency plans for, if he were to be assassinated. You've also seen the IRGC and the military side. I don't know if you would confirm this, but they are taking more of a measured approach. Like, they're trying to draw out their strikes. It's not as high frequency. They're more selective of where they're targeting in how many rounds, being more sparing of, like, there was a latest round of strikes in Israel just a few minutes ago, and there were only 3 rockets in that sort of barrage. So to me, the Islamic Republic are really going for a sort of a protracted conflict, because at the end of the day, all they have to do is survive. They don't have to beat Trump. They just have to survive to show that Trump has failed, because Trump has claimed, his goal is regime change. And if he doesn't achieve that, then he hasn't achieved military objectives. And technically speaking, then he can't say he's won.
Yeah, let's talk about Hezbollah's involvement. How significant is this? Because their military capabilities have been severely degraded. We don't know to what extent. And from what I understand, it was very limited attack by Hezbollah. Before I went to bed, I saw the news about the rockets. That's very different to what we saw in the last 2 years after October 7th. The amount of rockets Hezbollah had back then, the barrage of rockets that people expected, were talking about, that would overwhelm Israeli defense systems. That was a very limited, almost symbolic attack. Correct me if I got it wrong. But even when the rockets first went out of Lebanon, before Hezbollah officially took credit for it, I put out a post. I said, look, this is highly unlikely this is Hezbollah. I just don't expect them. That might have been some fringe group trying to drag Hezbollah or Lebanon into the war. And even Israel, the IDF or someone in Israel, said that this seems like an automatic response to an air defense response to Israeli missiles, or I can't remember what they said, but they said that that was triggered by Israeli strikes. It was a bit vague of a statement, but what they indicated is that this may not be Hezbollah. So I went to bed thinking Hezbollah's not going to join. They just can't. They really can't do much to help Iran. But maybe despite all the bombing over the last few years, they still have significant stockpiles. Where do you stand on their capabilities and whether they could make a difference?
Yeah, I think that's all very pertinent. Good points there. I think that the Hezbollah group, it was the flagship proxy of Iran. It was part of what's known as this Shia Crescent, right? So spanning all the way from Lebanon down through Iraq into Iran. That was what some academics, at least in the West, called it. And this idea was that Hezbollah has this infamous, terrifying sort of 100,000 plus stockpile of missiles. Now, obviously, the Israelis and this group had the year-long war, which culminated in a ceasefire about 15 months ago. That's how quickly things have moved in the past 2+ years, right? And it was the assassination, the dismantling, effective dismantling of the highest echelons of Hezbollah, with Nasrallah being taken out in that infamous Pages sort of attack and explosions, right? So that being said, though, despite their head of the snake, if you like, being removed, they are still a pretty potent force. But what, like you, I have been sort of thinking was that they probably wouldn't get involved, or if they did, it would be in a minimal capacity, because of their inability to really project the same amount of power, and also because they haven't really shown a willingness to give up their political brand. The thing about Hezbollah, which makes them quite unique, is that they are political as much as they are militarily. focused, or they have the military arms. Now, Israel killed about 4,000 people in Lebanon during that conflict and left more than 1 million people displaced, and about 80 soldiers of the IDF were killed. So that was a pretty bloody conflict at the time.
A million in a country of 6 million, less than 6 million. Just give people an idea. 1 million is a lot of people in Lebanon. So for people that don't understand how damaging that was to the country.
No, the country's been through hell. And
what I'm trying to understand though is, why did Hezbollah get involved? Because, and maybe a deeper dive into their capabilities, where are they getting their stockpiles from? If Israel keeps striking them on an almost daily basis since the war, they haven't stopped. Assad's regime is gone, and the logistical capacity from Syria to get weapons in from Iran through Syria, that was their main source of weaponry for years. That's been closed up, not completely, but to an extent. Inability to get anything through the sea. So what I'm trying to understand is, where are they getting their weapons from?
Well, I think that's a tricky question to answer, because, as we say, there's been a power shift in Syria itself. When HTS took over the country and ousted Assad, there were a fair amount of IRGC factions or groups loyal to the Islamic Republic in the southwest of Syria. That front was obviously around the Golan Heights, disputed territory. And I think what has reasonably happened is that Hezbollah didn't use all of their stockpile during that conflict with Israel. They still have tons left. They've also had opportunity to rearm, to restock. They do have decent engagements with the Houthis. I have decent knowledge from people I know in Russia that Moscow has been supporting the rearmament of Hezbollah to an extent as a sort of counterweight in the Western bloc.
That's pretty significant. That's very, very significant. You think Russia might have been arming Hezbollah throughout this time to counter?
Well, I think they've been giving them technological know-how. Certainly, like, they were helping the Iranians with certain elements, not necessarily a nuclear weapon, but there's definitely evidence to suggest that the Russians have been trying to restabilize that part of the Middle East because of their interests in Syria and their bases, their strategical bases in Syria. So certainly, if they could help to keep, because you keep in mind that the Russians, like the Iranians, benefit from perpetual instability, right? They like to foster instability in different parts of the world. So that, look at Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan, Armenia, that has been somewhere that the Soviets always would purposely destabilize to ensure that they could keep control. So I wouldn't say it's too far off to think that the Russians have definitely been supporting indirectly Hezbollah. But I think right now, Hezbollah, why are they deciding to get involved? Because I think the killing of Khamenei has changed the calculus of so many actors. I think it's changed the calculus of the way that Iran is operating now, targeting not just military bases, which I think that when we first spoke on Saturday, right, I emphasized proportionality, precaution, international law, like that. I think a lot of that has now changed because of such a big, well, the biggest deal of all, the head of the whole system being taken out and many of his senior personnel. So I think that the Iranians are largely focusing on any and all kinds of targets. And that's also galvanized Hezbollah to reconsider their options. If they can be enough of a problem for the Israelis in the long term, right, that they open this second front effectively, but also on the ground because they border one another, right? This changes the calculus huge, because right now it's mainly an aerial campaign. The Israelis, Americans have air supremacy in Iran. So if Hezbollah can deploy ground forces, that will be a huge problem for the Israelis, which raises the risk reward calculations are much higher and potentially puts a lot of pressure. You know, Trump's talking about this going on for weeks. I'm very skeptical of that, not because I don't think that they can't continue it for weeks, but because I don't think the political appetite is there. But what do you think?
Yeah, so another interesting thing is that the IDF called up reserves, I think 100,000 of them. KK, if you can confirm to me, because you sent me the news yesterday, but they called up a whole bunch of reserves yesterday. We're trying to understand why. Some people were falsely and obviously naively speculating that this could be a ground incursion into Iran. That's completely out of question. Is no circumstances in which Israel will send troops to Iran. So obviously the reason to have those reserves up is worried about proxies, and the only proxies that can pose a threat on land to Israel is Hezbollah. But Hezbollah's never attacked Israel There it is. That's the
Well,
news
actually,
here.
mate, just breaking news. Actually, just looking, I'm monitoring several different
Yeah.
news chains. BBC have just said that the IDF in the past minute have made orders to evacuate buildings in southern Beirut. Urgent evacuation for the buildings in south of Beirut. You must evacuate military activities, something the group denies. So if Hezbollah is, mobilizing forces and weaponry, then this could quite quickly become a second front and a much bigger one.
Saudi Arabian officials has also just said now a planned attack on Iran on Saudi oil facilities can justify military retaliation. And we also heard 10 minutes ago, Qatar Energy is suspending all liquefied natural gas production following this morning's attacks on Ras Laffan, the facility there, which is a large LNG producer. Oh, wow. They are the world's largest LNG producer with nearly 20% of global production. And this is something we talked about yesterday. What else could Iran do? The only two things that were left after they closed the Strait of Hormuz, they attacked civilian targets in the Gulf regions all the way to Cyprus. Cyprus wasn't civilian targets, but trying to drag pressure those countries to then pressure Trump. The last two things we've been talking about nonstop yesterday was about the targeting of oil refineries in the Gulf to disrupt the global economy, and number two, for Hezbollah to join. Well, both things now happened.
Well, I think that the economic component is definitely a longer term consideration for the Islamic Republic. I think, again, if they can put enough, for me, it's two main things. If they can put enough pressure on the sort of tourist economic zones like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, and so on, but also the Strait of Hormuz pressure points, then they don't necessarily have to go toe to toe with the Americans and the Israelis. They know that they can't go toe to toe like each individual aircraft. They don't really have an air force anymore. So they have to be much more selective. They have to be a lot more calculating in how they go about that. And as it's been proven time and again, right, the sort of David Goliath theory, you don't need a massive military to beat them, right? Vietnam is classic case of guerrilla warfare, asymmetric warfare. So the Iranians can quite easily pressure certain choke points asymmetrically with certain assets that they have, drones, obviously, and put pressure on the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen some of the biggest shipping companies discontinue through those routes. So you've basically got this build up now on either side of the peak of the Hormuz, with the claim that only Russian and Chinese vessels can go through, which, as I said on another stream, I find surprising considering how unsupportive Moscow and Beijing have been to Tehran. But yeah, the Iranians can continue to do that, and it can work quite effectively. Brent's gone up to $82 a barrel, gold's up by 2-3%. What I do find it interesting is whether or not some people reckon it could reach $100 a barrel. But I think that depends on the duration of the conflict. If the Americans begin to demonstrate that they don't have a hold of the situation, which could quite easily be the case in a few days' time, or what happens with Hezbollah now, then I think that will rupture, that will destabilize the markets even more than they have been, which is not as much as you might expect, because I think the Middle East this was expected from a lot of markets. Friends of mine in London are telling me that people are relatively they're monitoring the situation, but they're not like absolutely freaking out. It's also the weekday, right? So a lot of people have just gone back to work and are just getting on with their daily lives, their personal lives. So unless I think there's an absolute catastrophic shift in like oil, then I don't think it's going to be too big a deal. But the last point I'd make on that, before, I'm curious what you think, is the Europeans, right? The Europeans, this is a problem for Europe because some of them have not stockpiled enough oil or energy. So certain countries in Central Europe, I'm thinking Austria, have had to begin resupplying from Russia, which is obviously a huge benefit from Moscow for Putin's war in Ukraine, and that sort of stuff. So it shows you how all of this quickly can spill over very quickly.
Just got information as well. The Paphos airport in Cyprus and surrounding civilian locations have been evacuated.
Oh, wow. That's great. I was in Cyprus just a couple of weeks ago. That's mad.
Why target Cyprus though? What is the strategic benefit?
I don't know. I was thinking about this last night. I even made a post about it. I was going to make a video later on about it. I don't understand what the Iranians are doing by striking Cyprus. They are basically giving the green light to the British to come in. And I think it was pretty clear that Britain didn't want to come in because they were, not allowing the US to use their bases. That has now changed. But to me, it's not clear which came first, the British giving the green light to the Americans to use their bases, and that's triggered the Iranians to respond, or the Iranians have decided to just target Cyprus because of the loss of Khamenei and they don't have anything to lose at this point, and that's triggered the British. This is the fog of war, the rate at which things are changing. I think it's hard to tell what the triggering fact was, but overall, I think it's a weird idea to bring the UK in. The French are now sending the Charles de Gaulle, which, I mean, whether or not you think it's going to do anything, but the Europeans are definitely getting involved. The E3 have said, like, Germany is the third component, have said that they're going to get involved or defensively.
But they walked back these statements from what I heard. They said that. I'm not sure who said it.
Have you read it? Something else been out since? What did they say?
I think back about 2 hours ago. Let me check the exact news. But the Paphos airport, is it used? Some people are telling me it's used in the strikes on Iran. But then I've just checked on Grok now that it's not currently being used by the US military. But I think there's a lot of F-22s there. In my opinion, it's not about being. Just seeing now if it's being used. So I'm going to.
Paphos is. Cyprus is sort of split into three different zones. You sort of got English, Western Europe part of Cyprus, which is Paphos area. You've got Limassol, which is Russian, Ukrainian, more Eastern European area. And then the eastern part of the island is more Israeli, Lebanese sort of tourism. So the British have two main bases in the southwest near Paphos and in the southeast, which are the remnants of obviously the war with Turkey and Britain's control over Cyprus during the Second World War in the 20th century. So in Iran's opinion, those are legitimate targets, which, I mean, technically they are, I suppose. But again, Britain wasn't really involved in this beforehand. And now if it keeps spreading further and further westwards, I'm just seeing here actually Hezbollah, the intelligence chief of Hezbollah was killed in an Israeli airstrike in Beirut yesterday. The IDF has announced. Oh, that's interesting.
There've been also rumors that the head of Hezbollah was also killed yesterday, but there's just been rumors. I don't think it's been confirmed by either Israel or Hezbollah. But I wouldn't be surprised.
They killed Hussein Makled, who served as the head of Hezbollah's intelligence quarters, they say.
Intelligence, yeah. They haven't killed the head of the guy that replaced Nasrallah, the chief.
I don't know. I haven't seen him in the entirety of this.
Yes, I've just heard rumors. Yeah, I wouldn't expect him to come out either. Just on Hezbollah's front, let's just continue talking about that. The attacks by Hezbollah have been relatively limited. People in Lebanon are pretty split. A lot of politicians distancing themselves from Lebanon. I think Lebanon is in a position where they cannot afford another war. How far do you think Israel will go? And do you think we could see a ground incursion by either side, either Hezbollah or Israel? I'd be extremely shocked if we see a ground incursion by Hezbollah into Israel. They just don't have the capacity. But how about an Israeli ground incursion to get rid of Hezbollah once and for all?
I think that depends on Hezbollah. I don't think the Israelis want to have to spend the resources, the time on mobilizing ground forces if they don't have to. Obviously, they will probably put some in a limited capacity in a defensive posture, right? But to invade or whatever, go into Lebanon to sort of create another buffer zone, as they did along that river. I forget the name of it, on the southern border. River. Yeah, that I think would require a fair amount of planning, which I don't know whether they've had enough time to do yet. And that would require a fair amount of reallocation of attention from the broader Middle East and the airstrikes. I mean, not saying it's impossible. The IDF have been proven to obviously be very capable and adaptable. But I think I would wait to see what Hezbollah do, how far they are going to get involved. Are they going to just largely keep it in a distant, rocket striking situation, or are they going to literally start mobilizing units to invade Israel, northern Israel? I think we saw that in the past when they've. So I don't know if it's going to be like a 1980s kind of thing, but I also think what's interesting about that, Mario, don't know if you saw that, is that the Lebanese government have said that Hezbollah cannot move on this. They cannot mobilize.
The president has made a statement as well. They just.
I don't know how effective that is. I thought Hezbollah were pretty weakened by their war with the Israelis, so they kind of had to listen to the Lebanese military and government. or do you think that they probably will just do whatever anyway?
What I'm trying to understand is whether Iran's attacks now on Cyprus, on the Gulf nations, making this into a regional war and now involving Hezbollah, is that a sign of desperation or a sign of strength? I'm leaning towards the latter, just because there's nothing desperate about doing something that gives them a massive advantage politically and militarily. Being able to strike the oil refineries, which are not as protected as, let's say, Israel, which was Iran's target in the 12-day war, it just puts a lot more pressure on Trump to end the war. And we've seen Trump speak to the Gulf countries yesterday. However, the Gulf countries have been, at least in public, more supportive of the war and potentially joining the US, when early on they were more critical of any involvement of the US and talks of de-escalating the war. Now, Saudi is a bit different. Apparently, they sent a delegation. The defense minister went to Mar-a-Lago or Washington and to lobby Trump for the war. That's what Axios reported. Not sure how accurate it is. But on one side, the Gulf nations could pressure Trump. On the other side, they could turn on Iran. So it's a very tricky gamble. And Hezbollah, there's no Iran doesn't lose anything by Hezbollah joining. Lebanon,
I'm seeing reports here now, Mario, that the Israeli defense minister has said their next target, I guess, specific one singular target, right, person, is Hezbollah Secretary Naim Qasem.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's the replacement of Nasrallah, as you mentioned.
Exactly. I would have expected him to potentially be, I wouldn't expect him to last long. The intelligence capabilities of the US and Israel is significant, as we saw with the killing of Khamenei and Nasrallah. I've also gotten reports that CENTCOM said a fourth US casualty now. So we've got 4 US casualties, at least 4 that are being reported. Iraq is in shambles right now.
I think that's another critical thing, right? The more US personnel that die from this are, or at least injured, that's going to be a huge determining factor about, because Trump authorized all this without approval from Congress, which is, well, technically illegal in the US system. And certainly from my understanding of colleagues in DC, and if you just look at the polls, Trump's he's not as popular as he likes to pretend he is. There's a lot of blowback against him for saying he was peacetime president, but then he's undertaken more bombings of countries than any other president in living memory, I think. So the longer that this war goes on without decisive deliverables, i.e., the Khamenei is one, yes, but unless Iran comes to the table, what I was wondering yesterday was what scenario could follow the death of Khamenei, right? Could there be a more restrained part of the Islamic Republic that comes forward and says, yes, we'll renegotiate with you on most terms? Or is it a hard-line, committed group that will continue no matter what? Or will it be both, in the sense of that they try to negotiate while still striking? And right now I'm leaning towards the latter two. I don't think that the sort of restrained part of the Islamic Republic are there. I don't think they're willing to even remotely sort of calm down or slow down on all of this. And that makes it a real problem for the Trump administration, just unless they can clearly define and offer like this was worth it. Then I think it's gonna only be worse for Trump longer term. The more US personnel are at risk. And actually, come to think of it, late last night there was some reports from the UK, the Daily Telegraph, a newspaper there, which is saying that British troops were only sort of 100, 200, 400 meters away from Iranian airstrikes, which is insane, right? We're supposed to be good at keeping hold of these situations, and yet we're putting all these people at risk when it's completely unnecessary. Saudi, and also actually on the Saudi point, I think that's really interesting. I think they're quite different to the rest of the Gulf states. They're clearly not being targeted as much, apart from that oil refinery, as sort of Dubai, Kuwait, Qatar. So I'm wondering if that's because the Iranians are trying to keep the Saudis as a sort of open door to seek drawdown, or France maybe, as a mediator.
I've got a report as well. Iran hit a core element of the US missile defense system in the Al Udeid base in Qatar. So it was an AN/FPS-132 radar worth about $1 billion that was struck. That radar is a key node in Washington's global missile shield, covering a vast area from Europe to the Indian Ocean. Only 6 exist worldwide, including sites in the US, Britain, Greenland. It can detect launches from over 5,000 kilometers away, including from Russia. The damage may be repairable, and the US still has broad surveillance capabilities in the region, but the financial and strategic blow is real. No country has had previously taken out a component of US theater missile defense. This will not end the war, but it proves Iran can inflict serious damage. So that's pretty significant. And Iran's, I would say, if I ask my thoughts on whether Iran exceeded my expectations in terms of their military capabilities, by far. They've been able to simultaneously strike 7 countries now, the Gulf nations, Cyprus, Israel.
As far as I'm aware, it's 8 now. It's gone up.
8 countries. It's got hit, yeah. So they've been able to hit 8 countries. They continue to hit 8 countries while still having a barrage of missiles on Israel. Everyone talked in the 12-day war about Iranian capabilities being eroded. Well, now, months and months later on, with the US involved, which is significantly more capable than the Israeli military, Iran is still able to strike so many countries. And now we're getting news that they were able to strike $1 billion radar for the first time ever, a pretty significant US radar. Yeah, Iran, I think, is people I spoke. I'm not sure. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just a bit here from Qatar's stopped pausing production of liquefied natural gas.
Yeah.
Qatar Energy, which is the state-owned energy company, is halting it for the foreseeable future.
That's the one that supplies 20% of the world.
That's pretty big.
I think that's facility supplies 20%.
The biggest, isn't it? Or one of the world's top LNG producers. I think it's in the top 4, along with the US, Australia, and Russia, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty big. That's going to be a huge problem for countries.
Just depends on how long it'll be. I think it'll depend on how long it will be. It'll be shut down for. Another piece of news as well that just came in is and Lebanon is having a bit of a political crisis right now in terms of Hezbollah's involvement. A lot of people are talking on whether the Lebanese government will get involved in cracking down on Hezbollah. There's also footage I'm seeing right now. Let me show you. If you can put it up, KK, it's the last tweet on my account. A UAE oil rig in the Arabian Gulf was reportedly hit by an Iranian Shahed drone. So they're starting. That was the next point we're discussing, is oil refineries being hit. And it just came in now. And Saudi Arabia officials said if Iran plots strikes on their oil plants, they can expect military retaliation. I think Gulf nations are being pressured to respond militarily. And I think we might see Gulf countries join this war.
What's the strategy behind that, though? What, the Iran wants them to join because then that forces them to put pressure on the United States by a sort of roundabout way? Because I don't think they want. I think a lot of people have been surprised or impressed with the. Well, I certainly was. Perhaps just my lack of understanding of it was Emiratis' ability to intercept all those missiles. Right, they've done a disproportionately good job considering their size. So I'm not entirely sure what exactly is Iran's strategy there. I don't know if you have any thoughts based on the people you've spoken to in your shows.
It's not, well, strategy is not what people told me. Obviously, only Iran know what their strategy is. For me, the only explanation I have is they want to pressure the US by striking their allies. The more important thing is whether the US was ready for this. And everyone I spoke with, I'm not sure about people that you spoke with, everyone I spoke with, that's the oil rig, the Emirati oil rig that got struck by a Shahed drone.
But this is the thing, Mario, that they don't need to spend tons and tons of money. This is why I think the Iranians have learned so much. To your previous comments, I think that I didn't really know what to expect. I think I've been having a bit of an internal crisis the past couple of days, trying to make sense of because so many things I thought I knew or thought I understood changed a lot.
Like what?
And you're having to constantly reevaluate again.
Like what would the biggest things that you thought you knew or you expected?
Well, I just thought I didn't think Trump would ever do the full scale war.
Yeah.
I thought this was going to be. I thought this was going to be, if any military operation, I thought it was going to be a limited scope. I thought it was going to be military targets against the IRGC, against energy infrastructure, but I didn't think he was going to actually go in and outright take Khaname. And again, and it's just the willingness of him to make moves that so many people are not. Think about where we were 8 months ago, right? We were in the midst of the terrible conditions of Ukraine, the situation with Gaza, Sudan civil war, all these things. But then we had the 12-day war. We've had Nasrallah killed. We've had now the scenario that so many people in, Western academia, policy circles, analysts have been waiting for, or in the defense community, maybe, celebrating, which is all-out conflict between the Iranians, the Americans, the Israelis, and it's spanning across most of the Middle East. This is the scenario that people have dreamt about. So it's just crazy to try to even make sense of it, normalize it, and just to be much more definitive, I think that the Iranians have been pretty impressive in how much they've recalculated, restructured their military approach. And
I think that the biggest takeaway from this is everything we thought, as you said, everything we thought we knew, we expected to happen. Those lines are being crossed on a daily basis. Oil refineries are being hit. Hezbollah's in the war. This is a regional war. Cyprus was hit. So taking this into consideration, there's questions that I wouldn't usually ask. They'd be too out there, but we're way out there already. So the first one I've been thinking about what that means for Russia and Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine are looking at the US right now. US are stuck in another war. They would love to see the US stuck in a forever war, especially Russia with oil prices going up and with the US munitions, despite what Trump said that the US has stockpiles around the world. Every analyst tells me that US munitions are running low. How low? That's where they disagree, but they're definitely running low. From a strategic perspective, is there a better time for Russia to escalate their war in Ukraine? Is there a better time for China to make a move on Taiwan? This looks like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because after this war, if they manage to get rid of the regime, which I don't think is likely or possible, or likely, if they manage to get rid of the regime, then they start building up their stockpiles, and then the US is finally able to put their focus on the South China Sea. So wouldn't this be a perfect time for China, which has been upping all their naval drills in the region, to make a move on Taiwan? There's nothing that Trump could do.
I'm very much torn about the war in Ukraine and what would happen, Mario. I think on the one, because you have to think about it in two parts, right? On the one hand, Russia is greatly struggling with this situation. The Russians are incredibly dependent on Iran as one of the biggest counterbalances, one of their strategic partners against the US-led order. Although that's another reason I think a lot of this is making reconsider stuff I knew, because how much has Trump taken so many of the principles of the international order and just flung them out the window? Maduro in January, then the cartels in February. And there's a theory, which I'll come to later, which I'd love your thoughts on. But on the one hand, Russia is really at a disadvantage with this situation because they could lose one of their most important partners in the world, right? But on the other hand, it's kind of a benefit for Putin because it alleviates some pressure, it alleviates tension on Ukraine. And as I noted earlier, some European states, not many, but a few, enough, are having to reconsider their energy sources because they don't have enough stockpiled. And therefore, that's going to be what? Billions coming in for the Russian economy. The Russian economy is not in a good shape. So Putin doesn't really have to do anything. He just has to play his cards right. He has to remain relatively restrained. Because
why restrained? But Pyotr, why restrained? Why not using Oreshnik missiles? What can the West do when they're dealing with the war in Iran? Can they afford? Yeah, why not escalate their military?
Well, they do. They have already. Using Oreshnik missiles now would not really be much different to what they've done, Mario, in the past 6 months. We've been, talking in spaces or whatever when they've launched Oreshniks or when the Oreshniks were first mentioned. Right, the Oreshnik as a missile is largely based on one from 2011, and it's just been modified with some sort of hypersonic capabilities or more refined elements to it. But they do that, right? When the Ukrainians and the Russians were having trilateral talks with the US earlier this year, or even late last year, right, when the 28 piece point plan came out. What did Russia do? It blanketed so much of Ukraine, killing, I think it was the worst day in Ukraine, in the war in Ukraine. I think it was late November, December. And that was Putin just responding, telling him what he thought of the peace plans, right? So I don't think you need the war in Iran or the war with Iran to somehow legitimize Putin using more Oreshniks. He could. I'm not saying he can't, and he certainly may well do. We're only 72 hours into this thing, not even that. So there's no telling what he could do by Thursday. He may well do that because Europe doesn't have the capacity or desire to really go in there anyway.
What if let me take it a step further, Pyotr? What if they there's a lot of radical voices in Russia talking about a tactical nuclear strike in Ukraine to really put an end to
where have you read that?
No, I mean, that's been talked about since the beginning. Even when I went to Russia, I went to Ukraine and Russia, and there were some voices that I spoke to someone who's on the more radical side. He's like, Mario, there's a lot of voices around Putin that are telling him to conduct it, give a warning to a region in Ukraine so civilians can flee, and then hit that region with a tactical nuclear strike to disrupt Ukraine's logistics and allow Russia to take over the rest of Donbass. So something like that. The only reason that Putin's more restrained, first, he's more moderate than those extreme voices. I'm not saying he's completely moderate, but there's definitely people like Prigozhin, who's no longer with us, but people like Prigozhin who are more on the extreme side. But if you look at where we are now, the US is already pulling out of Ukraine, and now they're stuck in Iran. Europe's capacity, you're the expert there, but they're not ready for a direct conflict with NATO's not ready for a direct conflict with Russia. No one wants that. So what does Russia have to lose if they do strike Ukraine with a tactical nuke?
Because I don't think the tactical benefits of doing that, Mario, outweigh the strategic disadvantages, right? Let's think about it very simply.
But it just came in now. Saudi raised its military alert level. There's obviously reports of explosions in Western Tehran. You keep hearing those. And lastly, the National Security Council of Iran, the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council said, quote, Iran, unlike the US, has prepared itself for a long war. I think it's a very important statement that just came in as well.
Well, yeah, just to comment on that, I don't think that this was, I don't think the war will go on for ages because the US doesn't have the stomach to do so. So where you try to see each side claiming a victory, a bit like when Iran gave early warning signs to the Americans that they were going to strike that Qatar base, right? The American base in Qatar back in June, so that the Americans could withdraw the important assets or personnel so no one was killed. And then both sides could claim a win. And then you can draw down that escalation ladder, as we talked about a lot on Saturday. As for Ukraine, as I say, I don't.
Let me add one more. Let me give you one more context. Sorry, on Ukraine,
yeah.
Trump, according to Axios, that was just a few days ago, he told Zelensky he wants to end the war as soon as possible. He told him. He said that in a call a week ago. So just adding that Trump just shows Trump really wants an out of Ukraine, and will not be dragged in if Russia crosses another red line.
No,
he wants it to end. According to Axios, wants it to end by next month. According to their call. Axios reporting on their call last week, that puts Putin in a stronger position.
Putin has been in a relatively stronger position for a few weeks now. If you go back to November, December, he was in a not so strong position because the Ukrainians were working hard on the peace point plan. The Europeans had threatened this, usage of those 210 euro or something frozen assets to use to fund the war. So, but since then, the pendulum has swung back, and Trump has been more sympathetic to Putin. Comments by Vance and others at different places, such as the Munich Security Conference or World Economic Forum, have made it clear that Putin definitely has a favoritism, a sort of a sentiment for Putin over Zelensky. He doesn't like Zelensky. I don't think anyone in the US administration really does, to be honest with you. I think they just find him a pain in the ass because ultimately, and this is why, though, I'm still on the fence about whether Russia would benefit from launching a nuclear strike or something like that, which is that Russia wants to be reintegrated into the international system, right? They want to have normalized relations with America. They want to be, they want sanctions relief. They want investment and so on. So would that
and they want the Donbass.
They do want the Donbass. So why would you resort to using a nuclear weapon when you could possibly get a lot of that by just not doing as much, right? If Trump is so focused on Iran, Russia can continue to strike Ukraine, but I think a nuclear weapon would be so extreme that even Trump wouldn't be able to then do a deal with Putin. What kind of reputation would that do for him, right? So I think Putin's best policy is the one that he often employs in times of chaos elsewhere: strategic patience. Just wait it out. Try to put pressure on the Europeans through energy. Continue to strike Ukraine in key locations. Zelensky has made it clear that, he's aware that he needs to hold an election, right? Trump wants a deal by the next month. So now with this discussion of elections in Ukraine, so Putin can just wait out, maybe find a more favorable leader who takes up the position from Zelensky.
Another update, Pyotr, another update for you. We're talking about what is Iran's strategy in striking Cypriot bases. Well, we've got an answer to that question, and it seems that the strategy is working. Breaking Cyprus asks for British guarantees that its bases will only be used for humanitarian purposes. So Iran's goal is to have these countries pressure the US, pressure the West, and not being involved militarily. Well, Cyprus is doing exactly that after just one strike hitting the country. They don't want to end up like the Gulf nations and having the airports closed. One of the airports is already closed. And this is happening right now, with Cyprus asking for British guarantees that they will not be involved militarily.
Well, I'm saying also
for humanitarian purposes.
I've got an update here from ABC. All American bases are now on heightened alert, according to US officials. They're now under threat condition Bravo, which is the Department of Defense's policy defined as.
What if we have the same thing from Gulf nations? Gulf nations are saying they might join the war, but on the other side, they might do the complete opposite. They might ask the US to stop using their bases. And that puts the US in a very difficult position. If the Gulf countries, so they've got two paths. They can either join the war, or they can two extremes, or just ask the US to stop using their bases, so Iran will no longer target them, and their economy and their airports can open again. How long can countries like the UAE or Kuwait or Bahrain have their airports closed and their economy, I wouldn't say in a standstill, but taking a hit? Tourists are coming to the country, and the country not dependent on tourists, but tourists play a big role in the economy. So if I was Iran, it's a pretty well calculated move. Let me keep pressuring those countries, pressuring their economy, the countries that pride themselves on security and stability. Let's shatter that image until those countries pressure the US or force the US not to use their bases, and then Trump will need to find an exit ramp. And one indication that might also be working is the reports we saw yesterday, according to Yahyot News, I think it was, and one other source. The US, Trump, through two countries, was seeking a ceasefire with Iran. Not sure if you saw that news, and Iran refused, according to those reports. So could those be indications that Iran's strategy is working? And this time around, Iran is not only better prepared, but the strategy is much more calculated. And now we just got a report from Kabul News. Taliban spokesman says Afghanistan ready to support Iran if US attacks. Well, the US just attacked. I'm not sure when this came in. So that was a promise earlier. That was before the war. Sorry. So before the war, Afghanistan said they're ready to join the war. They haven't said it now. So they haven't joined the war yet. Not sure if that makes a difference. So they sent me an article that came in before the war. But just on the strategy first, Pyotr, isn't it working? Couldn't it also work in the Gulf nations the same way it's working in Cyprus?
Well, I think it's a bit early to tell exactly what the mindset is for the Gulf states are not Cyprus. Cyprus is a tourist. It's a small island. It has little to no military whatsoever. It's also a divided nation. Keep in mind, it still is divided from northern Cyprus and Turkey after 1974, and southern Cyprus, which is, well, okay, it's a sovereign state, but there's a lot of influence from Greece there, right? And of course, the British bases is the third element. The Gulf states are much more clearly defined sovereign states. They're also much clearly aware of the immediate threat that Iran poses. What I find interesting is that the Saudis have continued to engage the Iranians, like they what's the word? They called the Iranian ambassador to demand an explanation for X, Y, and Z. And I find that a bit weird. Like, what they're clearly keeping the diplomatic channels open. If they had no interest in trying to find an off-ramp for this entire situation, then they would just kick the entire, Iranian regime's diplomatic missions out. So I think that it's difficult to apply the principles of Cyprus to the rest of the Gulf. But this is, again, it comes back to the same message that you said and we mentioned before. Iran's strategy is quite simple, realistically. They can't go toe-to-toe with the Americans and Israelis together, let alone they struggled against the Israelis last year. I know that some people will not like me saying that, but they didn't outright beat Israel. They could have maybe lasted longer if the war had gone on more than 12 days. But quite clearly in this case, they have reorientated their strategy towards applying pressure across multiple fronts, across multiple, what's known in strategic studies as decisive points. You find a line or a point in the line of defense, which is weak enough that you can apply enough pressure that it breaks. That was a very standard policy used by the Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars. So in this case, Iran is trying to find decisive points across multiple fronts, which he can then apply enough pressure on to break through. Cyprus is an Achilles heel. Lebanon is an Achilles heel, where if they can galvanize enough of Hezbollah to respond, well, then we've got a potential ground force conflict ongoing, which is a much more complicated thing. And where war
could we see civil war in Lebanon? Because we've got now the Lebanese Prime Minister just said we need to disarm Hezbollah now. Let me see what language this is. That's English. But he essentially said we need to disarm Hezbollah right now. That's a pretty big statement for the Prime Minister to make. And there's been fears of civil war. If Hezbollah is weak enough, there's been talks about the government. Actually, the parliament in Lebanon voted to disarm Hezbollah, for the military to disarm Hezbollah. So everyone was talking on whether they would do that forcefully or just wait for Hezbollah to politically accept it. But how much pressure until, I think there's going to be a point where Hezbollah is going to be weak enough for the government to directly start to disarm them, because that would be the only thing that would allow Lebanon to prosper, is just having one military. As we've known historically, two militaries in one country just doesn't end well. So could we end up seeing, the worst case scenario of all this for the region, a civil war in both Iran and Lebanon? Iran's got all these separatist groups, the Baluch, the Kurds, the Azeris,
Azerbaijani Iranians.
Yeah, exactly. So you got all these different separatist groups, and you've got power struggles between the Artesh, the Iranian traditional military, and the IRGC. And there is no leading opposition figure that can take over from, Pahlavi. I don't think has enough support. And Lebanon has been through decades of civil war, and now there's Hezbollah splitting the country in the middle. Half the country, plus or minus, depending who you want to listen to, they want to support Hezbollah. The other half don't. The government most of them want to see Hezbollah disarmed. It just seems like a perfect recipe for a civil war in both countries.
I think the prospect of a civil war in Lebanon is more feasible in the short to medium term than it is in Iran, just because of sheer size. I'm not an expert on the intricacies of Lebanon, Hezbollah, Israel. When we were covering it together in the sort of that period of the heightened conflict, I became more familiar with it. But from my understanding, because of the very systematic way the IDF went about weakening the militia group, I think that the Hezbollah group, they were so wanting to ensure that they remained politically relevant that they kind of made concessions. So I still feel that is a key driver of theirs, a key motivation, because if they lose their political foothold, then the militia doesn't have much ability to influence politics. It's just considered more of a non-state outcast actor, even if it does have missile.
Yeah, if Israel destroys Lebanon enough, Hezbollah's decision to join will become more and more unpopular.
Well, I think Israel would be. The French have made comments around Lebanon in the past, and I think that would be a pretty sticky situation for the Israelis and the French. I'm thinking because of the French's obviously colonial relationship to Lebanon. Lebanon's a tough one. Iran, I think we're too far away for a civil war. That was the third scenario I was going to talk to you about.
Why too far away?
Because the Islamic Republic are holding right now.
Yeah.
The Islamic Republic are holding.
They planned for it as well, Pyotr. They've got the helicopters they bought from Russia. They were designed for domestic security. And then these helicopters are not going to strike the Gulf nations. They're not going to strike US bases. So they would be there for any separatist groups, maybe even protesters that are armed, or obviously if there's any special forces in the country, which I don't think will happen.
Well, I just think that the Iranian situation is much more fluid than Lebanon right now. The thing about Lebanon, it's a powder keg that could kick off much quicker. And because, again, of the simple size of it and proximity to Israel, the intensity of that could go much quicker. Because Iran is only largely a aerial campaign, we are getting reports of explosions X, Y, and Z, but they are...
Just got a report. Sorry to interrupt you. EU gas prices keep rising. They're up to 50% increase so far. How is the EU going to survive this economically?
Well, they'll survive. They won't do well, but they'll survive. It's just gonna eat more into European taxpayers. You're going to see inflation come up, prices will come up, and I don't think they'll go back down. It will be sticky. As always, military actions by the United States have secondary implications for Europe most of all, right?
And Europe has almost no say in any of those decisions.
No. It's very sad about Europe, but again, and that brings us back to the point about Iran, which is a civil war is certainly possible, but again, it has to be because there is no clearly defined united front in the Islamic Republic, right? And as I see it right now, Pezeshkian, the president, is still there. The head of the Security Council is still alive, and you've got this set of clerical meetings, the Assembly of 88, I think it's all Assembly of Experts, which are these 88 people who help choose the next president or supreme leader. So unless all of those components are effectively taken out, and there is no clear power, like there's a power vacuum for long enough, then that you can begin to see the shifts towards proper civil war. Because right now, I'm not seeing enough mobilization from, say, like the Kurds. I'm not seeing enough movements from the southeast with the Balochis. So I'm not sure where. It's definitely a scenario, but I think it's a longer term thing to think about for me, and to bring it to Europe. Because if that were to happen, then you've got tens of millions of displaced people who then where do they flee? Europe, possibly. So that's because we've got 4.7 million Ukrainians displaced from the war in Ukraine. We had 6+ I think of Syrians displaced in the past 10 years because of
the Aramco and the Ras Tanura refinery in Saudi is apparently shut down. Oh no, shut down.
No way.
No, I don't think. Not Aramco, the Ras Tanura refinery, one of the world's largest. I don't think it's completely shut down. It says, hold on, exports to Asia and Europe are halted. Well, that's pretty significant. Coming in from Al Jazeera, that is going to be very significant. I think this could really backfire on Trump, because the damage from this will be felt globally. Not a lot of countries have been silent to Trump's military escapades. Could start to speak up, because this is hitting a lot of countries because of the decision that Trump made. Because of Trump's decision, Gulf nations are being hit. Because of Trump's decision, whether it's Israeli influence or domestic reasons, whatever the reason is, because of that decision, Cyprus is getting economically hit. Because of that decision, Europe's economy is getting hit. So it's, I think the Strait of Hormuz is going to hit Asia as well, including Japan, an American ally. Japan's going to be hit economically through this as well. So I think the repercussions of this Iran strategy could end up working really well. I think the pressure that Trump will face, the pressure that the US will face, is going to be significantly more than expected. And as I said earlier, is that people I spoke with did not expect Iran to do this. They did not expect Iran to escalate to that level so quickly. I'm surprised they didn't expect it. And what do you expect when you call for regime change, strike with your full military might, and take out the leader? They just haven't given Iran any incentive to hold back. But apparently they're still surprised.
I'm seeing reports here. Some images that have been shared from Al Jazeera of Saudi Aramco's Ras Tanura oil refinery.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, so the explosions are extensive. I don't know if your team can get them up on the screen, but that's pretty nuts. So if they're going to start seeing this continue, like more and more of these oil refineries hit, because people need to remember Aramco is the largest, I think, in the world now. I think that will be the determining factor, right? Is the oil shocks. If you remember your history, the OPEC crisis of 1973, that was part of the reason that some people believe it led to the discontent within Iran. It led to a huge number of the issues that led to 1979. And some people are saying that because we're 2 days in, of course, oil is up. That doesn't mean it's long term. I mean, this is the point, though. If the Iranians continue this strategy, oil could quite easily surpass $100 a barrel. When was the last time it did that? I think if Trump continues to do this, yeah, you're going to get people from the Gulf states.
So I'm getting Bloomberg report that Ras Tanura and the Jubail ports are back to running smoothly as usual. That's reports coming out an hour ago. Al Jazeera saying they haven't started running yet, but Iran could strike them again. Another big thing that happened on day one, I want to get your thoughts on, and that's in Saudi. Another thing that happened on day one, Iran targeted Burj Khalifa, and they targeted the 7-star hotel in Dubai as well. I can't remember what it's called, the luxurious hotel. Why?
Oh yeah.
The Burj Khalifa was intercepted. The drone was intercepted. It's a very protected building. I think there was evacuations. I'm not sure whether that's been confirmed or not. And the other hotel was burning. They, no casualties. They extinguished the flames pretty quickly. Jumeirah's Burj Al Arab, which is the most expensive hotel in Dubai. Beautiful hotel. So that's not oil refineries. They're not striking those, but they'd be curious to get your thoughts on why they struck those locations, those symbolic locations, and why now they're focusing on the oil refineries, which I think is going to be more damaging to those economies. And by the way, Qatar suspends all LNG production and exports. Qatar has just suspended all LNG production and exports.
Yeah,
a portion of them. Now it's confirmed that all of them.
No. I'm just seeing that now as well. Yeah, gas prices in Europe have now surged. Hang on, let me just see this. Qatar is the world's second largest employer for people who aren't familiar. So they've surged up from 39 to 45 now, and the market has it's reacted instantly. Gas prices in Europe gas prices have jumped 50%. Oh my God. I don't think Trump can continue. If this is just Monday, the US is still kind of waking up on the West Coast at least. They can't sustain this. That's crazy. The Israeli, here's another one. 2,500 bombs, 2,500 bombs have been dropped in Iran since Saturday. That oil hit is insane. I think that kind of goes to your point there, Mario, right? That the war in Ukraine, was first about symbolism. The Iranians would hit sites that were of a legal basis, like military basis, or they would hit these buildings that were, to use your word, symbolic. In war, optics is important, the psychological impact, that sort of thing. So by striking the Burj Khalifa or other things like that, they're putting pressure on the most famous, touristy, lucrative areas possible, because they're trying to apply as much pressure as risk-free or as light lifting, if you like, without having to heavy lift too much as possible. And so those places, the tourist hubs, are core. I'm curious now what impact it's had on, I've got friends who are traveling from Dubai or through Dubai back to London. All their flights are grounded, all their flights are cancelled. Cyprus, the flights are cancelled. So Iran doesn't have to take out, carrier Abraham Lincoln to deal enough backlash that it causes trickle down effects for everyone else, right? All it has to do is target enough places. Qatar has now suspended its LNG production completely. That from Bloomberg, I think. So that means 50% price hikes in Europe. America is the biggest supplier of liquefied natural gas. So America is a little bit immune, but it's not immune from trade. It's not immune from inflation globally. It's not immune from a global downturn. So enough of this continuing. I mean, it's only 2 o'clock here where I am. By 7 o'clock, by 9 o'clock, we're gonna be busy. But what do you think?
I just put out a tweet now while you're speaking as well. It says, "Holy shit! Iran is now striking Gulf energy infrastructure as well as Cyprus. Iran was a lot more prepared than anyone expected, and Israel cannot continue this war for much longer if this continues. Energy prices are spiking, and we're only at day 3. The world economy will take a big hit, especially Europe and the Gulf." And then I've just got a news as well from Tehran. Yeah, if you can play that, KK. I'm not sure if you need the one just came in on the ReRom group. Just shows the damage in Tehran. So we're talking about what's happening in the Gulf, what's happening in Lebanon, but Israel took a massive hit as well, Pyotr. The barrage on Israel.
I haven't had a chance to look at the situation in Israel as much.
Not in a good place, especially yesterday. And this is what's fascinating is that while striking all these Gulf targets, while striking Cyprus and the US bases, Iran's also able to cause significant damage to Israel despite their Iron Dome. So it just gives an idea of how prepared they are and their capabilities as well. But yeah, this cannot go on for much longer. I'd be very surprised, and I'm already surprised how Senator Cutter and other US officials, I think Trump himself said it as well yesterday, that he expects this war to go on for weeks. Not sure if this is a bluff. We don't know what the hell is a bluff anymore, but every bluff turns out to be fact. The whole military buildup, some people thought it would be a bluff to pressure Iran on the negotiating table. Obviously turned out that I'm not sure if you saw the report, but the strikes were planned a week from now. They delayed them because I think it was the weather at the time. That
Where
was
did
not
you read
ideal
that? I didn't see that.
Yeah, I saw that while I was sleeping. I think New York Times was reporting it. Let me find it quickly for you. But that's Iran, by the way. That's Tehran. Iran's getting hit the hardest. Just remember, everyone, that the Iranian people are going to suffer the most. So this is according to Axios. US and Israel originally planned to strike a week earlier. Let me put the tweet up for the audience. Okay, I'll send it to you now so you can put it up for the audience. But that's pretty important because that just shows that there's always planned. The negotiations were just a front. The decision was made a while ago. Some people say it was made between Netanyahu and Trump back in December when they met before New Year's. The attack was supposed to happen February 21st. Weather and coordination issues pushed it to 28th. That delay created space for one more round of talks in Geneva. Israeli and US intelligence spent that week nervous that Khamenei would move underground. They deliberately signaled no imminent strike, so he'd feel safe staying above ground. It worked. The final American offer in Geneva, a 10-year moratorium on enrichment, then symbolic capacity, plus free nuclear fuel for civilian needs. Trump's team was very explicit that rejecting it meant military force. Iran rejected it. Kushner and Witkoff called Trump. The president gave the order. That was over a week ago. That was back before February 21st. One US official said there was concerted effort to negotiate in good faith, including in Geneva, but nothing came of it. So I take it back. The US was allegedly negotiating in good faith, but when Iran rejected a 10-year moratorium on enrichment and symbolic capacity and free nuclear fuel for civilian needs only, when they rejected that, that's when Trump made the decision to strike. And according to US official, we had our assets ready to go. The talks were real, but there was a strike date on the calendar behind them. So that strike date was a week from now, and everything that happened in the last week was more for show and to keep Khamenei above ground to be able to strike him, and that worked. So yeah, that's the information that came out of Axios a few hours ago.
Okay, interesting. I was pretty convinced that Trump had made a decision on Friday night.
Hexeth said, Hexeth's comment, it's just a funny one. We didn't start this war, but under Trump, we are finishing it. So according to Hexeth, the US did not start this war, Pyotr. It seems we got our facts wrong. Not sure who started it. But then Hexeth says if you kill Americans...
Hexeth is clearly an expert. I'm not sure how I feel about him as defense.
No, this is politics. Putin invades Ukraine. We didn't start this war. Trump begins this war in Iran. We didn't start this war. It's funny how politics works. Hexeth said, if you kill Americans, if you threaten Americans anywhere on earth, we will hunt you down without apology and without hesitation, and we will kill you.
I think the biggest aspect to all of this so far is the Qatar suspension.
But it depends how long it's going to be for.
They're the biggest biggest outputters. Hegseth, he spoke about potential US casualties this morning. War is hell. I do wonder what the sort of the distinction is between the sort of the politics and the military arms right now, because half of what the US administration says or does is so different to what's being done on the ground in the military bases, right? They've shifted the bases to be in Bravo, which is it means it's an increased or more predictable threat of terrorist activity. But then sort of Hegseth's flippant comments, right? It's just they're just.
But it's
so
expected.
constructive.
I think we see that in every country. I think just controlling the rhetoric. So I think there's even talks about. Let me see if I can find it. That's going to be a bit of a funny one for anyone that's deep into politics. There's talks that the US is saying that, telling Congress that there was an imminent attack on US bases that was planned by Iran, and this is why the US had to act. Let me see if I saved that tweet. I'll find it later on. But I think this is all part of politics. I think it's just not that important when making trying to analyze things from a strategic and geopolitical perspective. So I think those comments are pretty useless. Let me go to another piece of news that just came out here. So this is a video by Iranian propaganda video. There's that jet that fell in Kuwait. Have you seen that? The fighter jet, I think it was an
No, I haven't. What's that? Have you got that up?
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, of course. So, KK, if you can get the footage of the F-15 in Kuwait that was shot down. Now, Iran says they shot it down. There's no way they shot it down over Kuwait. And Kuwait or the US is saying it was friendly fire, which makes more sense. Might have been Kuwaiti air defense striking the jet. Not sure what friendly fire the pilot survived. Go ahead.
There's just more comments from Hegseth. He said that Washington will pursue and kill those responsible for the deaths of Americans at a news conference. He reiterated that Iran must not be allowed to obtain nuclear weapons and accused Tehran of building up conventional military capabilities as a protective shield for what he described as its nuclear ambitions.
That's the brother. That's the pilot parachuting from the jet after it was shut down in Kuwait. You want to play it again, KK, for Pyotr, for the audience? KK, do you want to play that clip again? I think Hegseth's comments. Do you think Trump will seek an off-ramp with what we're seeing?
I don't, but that's the thing, though. As we're talking about it and more news comes through, like, you obviously begin to think about, like, if America does get to such a position where so many partners and allies are pressuring it, like, how would the US administration frame that? How would they sort of say, we've decided to, stop our military operations? Because that would unequivocally look like a failure. So many people would be like, well, you've just been beaten by the Iranians or forced to stop because you've not been making any significant progress. So to me, I just don't see how the US administration would be able to sell that very well. Yeah. It's I don't know. I think that's a really difficult one, to be honest with you. I can't imagine Hegseth coming out and being sort of limited in his comments, right? He's pretty blunt, and him suddenly going, "Yes, we've decided to pause operations." He goes on to say that the US set the terms of this war from start to finish and adds, "We hope the Iranian people take advantage of this incredible opportunity." Sounds like a business deal. He also urges the Iranian security forces to choose wisely. We fight to win and we don't waste time or lives, he emphasizes. He also claims Iran was using talks with the US to restart nuclear ambitions. Nuclear ambitions do not need to be buried underneath mountains. The US was well aware of the situation, and Tehran of refusing, quote, to negotiate a peaceful and sensible deal. They were stalling, buying time to reload their missile stockpiles and restart their nuclear ambitions, he continues. President Trump doesn't play those games. Interesting. He continues by saying that Iran has a, quote, conventional gun to our head as they try to lie their way through a nuclear bomb. It's not a so-called regime change war, but the regime, quote, surely changed and the world is better for it. Interesting. I find that last bit rather revealing. Maybe I'm overanalyzing it, but I think that sort of, is that Hegseth trying to walk back?
That's a very interesting comment. Can you read out the exact, let me see if I can find it here.
Yeah,
can you read out the exact comment? That's an important one.
It's not so, he says the regime was, quote, gifted death from America and death from Israel. It's not, quote, a so-called regime war, but the regime, quote, surely changed and the world is better off for it. Oh, that's interesting. I think that's him trying to clarify that they never meant to take out every single part of it.
That's really interesting. Yeah, send me that comment on WhatsApp. Cool. Well, man, it's a pleasure to speak to you longer than expected with all the news that is happening. I really appreciate it. I think that comment by Hex is probably the most notable thing, as well as the halting of exports of LNG from Qatar, which I think is going to be very significant for the world economy. I think they're both interrelated. This is probably a response to the shock that this is having on the Gulf and the global economy and on Cyprus. I really hope this is Hegseth walking back the plans for regime change, because yesterday we're seeing people calls for people to hit the streets, which we're not seeing mass protests in Iran yet. So hopefully that's US seeking an off-ramp. But Pyotr, pleasure to have you. For everyone else, we'll be going back live in about 30-40 minutes. Be live again, and I'm sure we'll have Pyotr on later today if he has the time. But
yeah, well, let's definitely do this again, Mario. Definitely for everyone watching, I would focus on the energy comments. I would focus on Hegseth's comments, because I think the US has perhaps overestimated the willingness of the Iranian people to sort of take up arms and stand up against the Islamic Republic. But ultimately, all the people stuck in the middle, including Mario, doing a good job in Dubai. But thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you there, and stay safe out there.
Thanks, everyone. See you in a few. Send me that comment by Hegseth on WhatsApp. I
will do. I use my camera as my because I'm traveling. I use my camera as my phone as my camera, so I'm relatively light.
We're still live, by the way. I think there's a bit of a glitch.
Hi, everyone. We're still live.
He's not able to end the live. Yeah, we're
talking off camera, but yeah, we're definitely going to be sharing that comment.